What if the United States didn't just raid a cartel? It declared war. Imagine a silent alarm blaring at 5:47 a.m. on September 22, 2025, and within the next 24 hours, the world watched a storm of 40mm grenades, advanced surveillance drones, and a full-scale assault that took down the core of the CJNG cartel in Mexico City. Over 4,000 lives were lost, a distribution network was shattered, and the global drug war was forever altered. This isn't a fictional thriller. It's the truth behind the FBI, DEA, and ICE's covert operation known as Los Chapitos, a threefold coalition of 23 U.S. field divisions and 7 international partners. In a memo to Congress, the White House even labeled cartel members enemy combatants, turning the war on narco gangs into a declared armed conflict. Today, we pull back the curtain on that fateful night. Why the U.S. chose to strike, how the assault unfolded, and the staggering human cost that followed. Stay with us as we dive into the data, the daring tactics, and the reality of a total war that finally crushed the cartel's heart in Mexico City. At exactly 5:47 a.m. on September 22, 2025, a line of monitors flickered to life inside a federal command center that had been humming with silent anticipation. The first alarm rang, a piercing note that echoed through the night, a signal that the United States had officially declared an armed conflict with the narco gangs. In a memo sent to Congress, the White House did not merely label cartel members as criminals. It framed them as enemy combatants, a shift that redefined the scope of the war. The world watched that night as the deadliest blow ever dealt to the CJNG cartel unfolded. Over 4,000 lives were lost, a distribution network shattered, and a seismic shift rippled across the global drug war. The answer to how this unprecedented assault came to be lies in a covert alliance between the DEA, 23 U.S. field divisions, and 7 foreign partners, orchestrated under the operation code named Los Chapitos. Their mission: sever the cartel's lifelines before it could regroup. The operation was not a routine bust. It was a 5-day, multi-agency campaign timed with surgical precision, designed to cut every node in CJNG's pipeline. If even a single artery remained, the cartel could have crawled back to life. The objective was brutal and clear: dismantle the distribution chain and destroy the infrastructure that kept its empire alive. When the alarm sounded, agents were already moving. Simultaneous raids erupted across Los Angeles, Texas, the Pacific Northwest, and New England. At the same hour, foreign partners struck CJNG assets overseas, a coordinated strike that left no room for the cartel's usual evasive tactics. Stash houses were uncovered in quiet suburbs, distribution hubs lurked near family neighborhoods, and couriers blended into everyday work routines. CJNG had not simply been a street gang hiding in shadows, it was a global enterprise operating in more than 40 countries, disguised as normalcy. Within 72 hours, surveillance teams noticed the first signs of panic. Couriers vanished from their routes, regional distributors went silent, financial channels froze, and the cartel's normally fluid communications fractured. The machine was still running, but it was coughing, stumbling, losing rhythm. The window to finish the job had opened, but it would not stay open for long. Then came the seizures. When agents breached warehouses and transport nodes, they uncovered staggering quantities: 6,000 kilograms of methamphetamine, nearly 23,000 kilograms of cocaine, 92 kilograms of fentanyl powder, and 1.1 million counterfeit fentanyl pills, each potent enough to kill. Every bag, every crate was more than contraband. Each represented lives that would have been lost, families that would have buried loved ones, neighborhoods that would have drowned in addiction. The hits didn't stop at narcotics. Agents seized $48 million in cash and assets that CJNG used to buy loyalty, influence traffic, and expand its reach. Alongside it, 244 firearms were pulled from circulation, tools of intimidation, enforcement, and terror. CJNG felt the blow. For the first time, the cartel's U.S. network was not bending under pressure, it was breaking. The investigators realized that this takedown was only the opening move. The network they had just struck was only one layer of a structure spread across continents. Chemical precursors came from foreign suppliers. Megalabs operated in Mexico. Cross-border transport routes used commercial trucks. Suburban stash houses in the United States housed the final product. And local redistributors fed neighborhoods one shipment at a time. CJNG didn't behave like a gang. It operated like a corporation with a single product line: poison. Even decapitated, the machine could regrow. Even crippled, it could adapt. Federal commanders knew this. DEA analysts knew this. Every agent in the field understood a simple reality. The takedown mattered only if the infrastructure stayed broken. If even one corridor reopened, CJNG would return with the same brutality, the same money, the same reach. During this surge, there were no delays. Court delays, jurisdiction delays, communication delays. The hits came too fast, too widespread, too synchronized to counter. When Los Angeles was breached, Houston was already on fire. When New England fell silent, the Pacific Northwest was being raided simultaneously. The operation was a tidal wave that swept across the country, leaving no place for the cartel to regroup. The sting felt less like a raid and more like a suffocation. The cartel had woven itself into the everyday fabric of American life. In quiet streets, investigators found clandestine stash houses tucked behind front-door flower beds under the guise of basement storage units. Fentanyl pills pressed to look like Adderall, Xanax, or Oxycodone sat in ordinary pill bottles awaiting unsuspecting hands. No one had noticed them on pharmacy shelves because they were never there. They were forged in clandestine Mexican laboratories and slipped into the hands of suburban families as innocuous prescriptions. Every courier caught was a face they'd seen before: a delivery driver, a trucker, a courier for a tech startup. They bridged the gap between the cartel's mega labs in Mexico and the kitchen tables in the United States. CJNG had not invaded communities, it had blended into them using ordinary traffic patterns, commercial trucking routes, and local businesses that did not raise suspicion. 670 link suspects were removed from the system in a single operation. Street dealers, transporters, redistributors, middle-tier managers. Each arrest severed an artery. Each interrogation exposed a new vein. Each seized phone was a map piece that unlocked another branch of the network. The seizure of $48 million in cash and assets was not merely symbolic. For CJNG, money was the lifeblood that fed shell companies, safe houses, silent deals, corruption, and loyalty. On that night, federal agents arrested and flipped twin brothers from Chicago's Little Village neighborhood, Pedro and Marguerite. Removing that cash starved the machine. The cartel's empire was ripped apart. The day the cartel's empire was torn asunder became a watershed moment in the war against drug trafficking, a testament to the power of coordinated intelligence, relentless determination, and the willingness to redefine what it means to fight crime. The takedown was not a single raid, it became a surgical strike on the cartel's lifeblood. With every dollar seized, the ability of CJNG to buy safe houses, pay bribes, and bankroll future shipments evaporated. The seizure of $48 million in cash and assets did more than just empty the cartel's coffers. It shattered the financial arteries that fed the empire's day-to-day operations. In the vaults of federal agencies, analysts watched as the numbers fell away. 92 kilograms of pure fentanyl powder and more than 1 million counterfeit pills. Each pill a silent assassin that could have claimed millions of lives if it had slipped into the market. The realization was chilling. CJNG's weapon was addiction, its battlefield the American streets, and its casualties measured in overdose statistics. For the first time, officials stopped labeling the organization merely as a drug cartel and began to call it a foreign terrorist organization. The label reflected not ideology, but the sheer destructive impact of its product on public health. The shift from seizure to system shutdown became the mission's heartbeat. Teams in real time collapsed communication nodes, intercepted courier chains, and froze financial routes before they could be rerouted overseas. Every hour mattered. Every delay risked a recovery. Night entries continued, the relentless pressure never slackened. By day 5, the numbers on the command board were staggering. 6,000 kilograms of methamphetamine, nearly 23,000 kilograms of cocaine, 92 kilograms of fentanyl powder, 1.1 million counterfeit pills, 244 firearms, 670 arrests, and $48 million in cash and assets removed. One of the largest cartel disruptions in modern U.S. history. Yet, the leaders were still out there, hidden and waiting. The intelligence analysts watched intercepted signals and spotted unexpected patterns of confusion. CJNG's response threads fractured. Middle-tier coordinators who had moved product with disciplined precision became silent. Some abandoned their routes, others tried to run. Courier channels that once pulsed like arteries began to shut down. For a fleeting moment, it seemed the machine might stall. Then a darker realization hit. Even wounded, CJNG was still transmitting encrypted chatter between surviving nodes. It wasn't loud, but it was there. The Empire was gasping for air. Agents understood that the only way to break the loop was to expose how the network operated beneath the surface. Seized phones, ledgers, laptops, and routing notes painted a disturbing picture. CJNG was not hiding in remote corners of cartel territory. It was hiding in plain sight, using suburban stash houses, commercial trucking routes, small shell companies, and neighborhood fronts that raised no suspicion until it was too late. The drugs were mass-produced in Mexico, but the delivery system was American. Quiet streets, ordinary storefronts, everyday traffic. Families lived a few walls away from international trafficking hubs without ever knowing it. When those numbers were first logged, agents did not see statistics. They saw the scale of destruction that had unfolded in a single relentless 5 days. The operation had not only crippled the cartel's supply chain, but had pierced the heart of a system that had quietly poisoned communities for decades. The stakes were clear. A single lapse could reignite the machinery of terror and bring the deaths back into the streets. The mission, therefore, became a race against time. An unending effort to keep the network suffocated until every node was dismantled and the threat eradicated for good. The money fell into the net like a curtain of coins. Each dollar seized meant a slice cut from CJNG's coffers, a reduced ability to bankroll new shipments. The reclassification as a terrorist entity also opened new avenues for international cooperation. The sobering conclusion of the operation was not a celebration, but a briefing. Federal officials called the surge both a victory and a warning. They had stopped an active network and saved lives, but the architects of the empire were still out there, ready to rebuild. The overdose crisis did not pause. Fentanyl did not retreat. CJNG was not finished. The 5-day strike had broken one American branch, but the cartel's global reach meant that any pause would be exploited. Constant, coordinated pressure emerged as the only strategy that could truly cut the cartel. A relentless assault that left no room for adaptation or escape. The surge proved that when agencies moved as one, CJNG's foundation could be shaken to its core. But the battle was far larger than the border. The cartel's real power lay in placement. It hid in suburban houses, in commercial trucking routes, in small shell companies that looked like legitimate businesses. It disguised itself in everyday traffic, in routine deliveries that no one noticed. The counterfeit pills, these were the most silent assassins. They looked like harmless tablets until they killed. Thus, the battlefield was every street, every school district, every quiet neighborhood where a single pill could end a life. The brief moment when the last pill was confiscated carried a weight that could not be measured in trophies. Officers in the command center felt the full gravity of the moment. The surge proved that synchronized strikes could collapse an empire's infrastructure, yet the underlying structure, suppliers, leadership, the capacity to regenerate, remained intact. A single raid, no matter how large, cannot dismantle a cartel built on a corporate model of decentralized, resilient nodes. The lesson was clear. Every new surge would be answered by a new wave. The battle extends beyond Mexico City to the quiet suburbs of every American town, and the response must be global, coordinated across nations and agencies to keep the cartel's corporate model from re-engineering itself and to protect communities from the silent threat of counterfeit pills that look like harmless tablets until they claim a life. The command center settled into a low hum, a quiet aftershock that felt more like the pause between thunderclaps than a genuine calm. Screens flickered with the red streaks of seized narcotics, the numbers of arrests scrolling like a digital tide. Each figure was a reminder that victory had been tasted, but the war was far from over. Analysts gathered around a sprawling map that stretched from the Midwest to Veracruz, from Boston to Bogota. Lines of supply routes were crossed out, but the network remained, a web that had been trimmed but not severed. A single sentence in a briefing file captured everyone's attention. The organization is resilient. We will need to stay a step ahead. The weight of that sentence settled over the room like a heavy coat. The cartel's corporate model had been engineered to survive shocks and to rewire itself in the shadows of ordinary commerce. In the days that followed, the agencies that had converged for the surge, FBI, DEA, Customs and Border Protection, Army Criminal Investigation Command, realized that a single coordinated assault was only the first blow. The seizure of assets, the dismantling of a shipping hub in a small Arkansas town, and the arrest of a dozen high-ranking operatives had indeed crippled CJNG's domestic arm. Yet the cartel's financial network, shell companies that had been purchasing trucks and storing barrels of fentanyl under the guise of legitimate businesses, continued to operate. The money flowed across borders, now under heavier scrutiny, but not stopped. An analyst, in a subsequent briefing, pulled up a new layer of data, a cluster of corporate registries in Panama, Delaware, and Belize. The connections traced back to the same names that had surfaced in earlier investigations, pointing to a network of offshore entities serving as money mules for the cartel. The map flickered red as the flow of funds from seized US dollars to those shell companies and back into the cartel's pockets became visible. This realization opened a new avenue of attack, one that required collaboration with foreign regulators, prosecutors, and international financial institutions. The joint effort to trace and freeze these accounts would test the limits of cross-border legal cooperation. While the legal battles raged, the streets of the suburbs that had once been quiet and ordinary took on a new sound. The low, continuous rumble of a truck carrying a pallet of counterfeit pills became a familiar, unholy soundtrack. Each vial, coated in the same unremarkable white, contained a lethal dose of fentanyl. The federal agencies responded by deploying handheld spectrometers capable of identifying the chemical signatures of fentanyl in seconds. These tools were distributed to local police departments, community health centers, and even school district offices. Suddenly, everyday inspections, whether at a grocery store or a pharmacy, became frontline defenses against the cartel's silent attacks. The spectrometer's glow, a small white circle of light, became a symbol of vigilance in neighborhoods where the threat had once been invisible. Parallel to these technological advances, the narrative shifted into the courtroom. High-profile trials began to unfold, each case threading the seized evidence back to the broader criminal enterprise. In one case, a former cartel enforcer confessed that the cartel had hired a group of counterfeit drug manufacturers in Colombia to produce the pills that had killed thousands in the United States. The testimony revealed a hierarchy of production, distribution, and execution mirroring a corporate chain, with each level insulated from the others. The judge, hearing these details, ordered the seizure of multiple offshore accounts and revoked corporate registrations that had once been dormant. The legal system, once a slow-moving entity, now became a rapid response arm, dismantling the financial scaffolding that supported the cartel's operations. The surge's impact rippled beyond law enforcement. Communities ravaged by overdose deaths began to feel a glimmer of hope. Public health officials launched a coordinated education campaign, partnering with local churches, faith-based groups, and senior centers. Survivors, those who had once lived in fear, stepped forward to share their stories, turning personal loss into collective empowerment. Survivors testified at community forums, urging families to recognize the warning signs and to seek help before it was too late. In schools, teachers introduced curricula on drug abuse prevention, weaving the harsh reality of fentanyl into lessons on health and safety. These efforts cultivated a culture of resilience, turning grief into action and creating a bulwark against future waves of the cartel's influence. Yet, as communities rallied, new suppliers emerged. The cartel had adapted, shifting from large pallets to smaller, more discreet packages that slipped through customs and into the hands of the most vulnerable. Community engagement had to evolve. Volunteers, parents, teachers, retirees formed a grassroots surveillance network. Armed with spectrometers and a shared sense of responsibility, they conducted neighborhood patrols, reporting suspicious activity to the command center. Their presence in street corners and local parks became a living reminder that the war was not only fought in distant borders, but also on the front lines of everyday life. These volunteers, by sharing information and acting as eyes and ears, helped keep the agencies informed and ready to intercept the cartel's smaller, more agile tactics. Strategic vision emerged from this relentless pressure. Intelligence sharing with allies, technological innovation, community engagement, and legal action formed a multi-layered approach designed to keep the cartel from regaining footing. The teams recognized that their mission extended beyond arrests and seizures. It was about saving lives, protecting the most vulnerable, and preventing the cartel from re-emerging. A sustained commitment to intelligence sharing with foreign partners, the development of new detection technologies, and the strengthening of legal frameworks would ensure that every new wave of the cartel would meet an equally decisive response. The command center's lights dimmed at night, but the officers' eyes remained bright, focused on the data, the code, the lines of supply routes that glowed across the map. The war was ongoing. The next wave, whether in a new form or a different corner of the world, was inevitable. Yet the lessons of the surge, coordination, resilience, relentless pressure, would guide the response. The promise was clear. The United States would strike faster, deeper, and harder, ensuring that the deadliest chapters of CJNG's empire would be written in silence, never again in the roar of a new surge. The lights in the command center flickered as the night deepened, yet the pulse of activity never waned. A new intelligence file had just slid into the analyst's hands, a trail of encrypted communications pointing to a clandestine distribution hub beneath the surface of Mexico City. The network, once dormant, had reignited, exploiting the porous border corridors and the burgeoning digital marketplace to reach vulnerable populations. The stakes had never been higher. On the ground, the volunteers' patrols had grown into a coordinated mesh of neighborhood watch groups, each equipped with handheld spectrometers and a shared database. A child's voice echoed through a dusty alley, the sound of an unauthorized package sliding into a backpack. The volunteers, armed only with determination and the knowledge that every small success could save a life, intercepted the parcel before it could be handed over to a dealer. The case was logged, evidence secured, and the suspect was later brought before a federal magistrate. The courtroom scene was unremarkable in its formality, but heavy with emotion. The defendant, a young man whose family had lost a sibling to an overdose, stood trembling, a silent testament to the ripple effects of this cartel's machinations. Meanwhile, the legal framework that had been built during the surge, offshore asset seizures, corporate revocations, and enhanced whistleblower protections, was tightening its grip. A new directive from the Department of Justice required any corporation with ties to the cartel's supply chain to undergo an exhaustive audit. The audits uncovered a web of shell companies, money laundered through legitimate banking institutions, and a sophisticated laundering mechanism that had once kept the cartel invisible. The crackdown was swift. Asset seizures rippled across continents, leaving the cartel's financial backbone brittle. Each bank account frozen was a blow to their ability to purchase, transport, and distribute fentanyl in increasingly stealthy packages. The DEA's field operatives, bolstered by intelligence from ICE, traced the origin of the latest wave of fentanyl to a clandestine laboratory near the border. In a joint operation that spanned 3 days, agents seized a cache of synthetic opioid precursor chemicals, dismantled the lab's infrastructure, and arrested the technicians who had been siphoning raw materials from local chemical plants. In the aftermath, a public health announcement was issued explaining the dangers of the new, more potent formulations that had been engineered to evade standard detection protocols. The public's understanding of the risk profile expanded, allowing families and schools to recognize the warning signs early. Technology became an ally in the most unexpected ways. A satellite imagery team mapped the movement of shipping containers across key ports, cross-referencing weight and cargo manifests with known patterns of cartel activity. On the streets, a real-time data feed from the command center displayed heat maps of suspicious movements, guiding officers to intercept packages before they reached distributors. These tools, once reserved for national security operations, were repurposed to serve the communities that had suffered the most. The shared database that the volunteers used now included a public-facing portal where citizens could report suspicious activity, streamlining the flow of information from the field to the analysts. Public engagement reached a crescendo when a survivor, once a quiet presence at community forums, led a town hall meeting in a downtown square. The survivor's testimony, raw and unfiltered, resonated with the audience. "I've watched 3 families die because they didn't know the signs," she said. "But I've also seen this community rally together, pulling from their own resources and refusing to let the cartel dictate our future." Her words spurred a wave of volunteerism. More parents, teachers, and retirees joined the surveillance network, bringing their own skills, languages, data analysis, forensic science to bear on the problem. The result was a multifaceted front line that blended professional law enforcement with citizen initiative. As the operation progressed, an unexpected partnership emerged between the federal agencies and local universities. Scholars in forensic chemistry collaborated with DEA chemists to develop a rapid screening test that could be deployed in pharmacies and schools. The test, a simple color-changing reagent, could detect traces of fentanyl in under 2 minutes, providing an immediate response to suspicious packages. The test's deployment in high-traffic urban centers acted as both a deterrent and a safety net, allowing first responders to act before a package could reach an unsuspecting user. Even as the cartel's overt operations faltered, intelligence revealed a new strategy: the fragmentation of supply chains into micro-operations. Instead of large pallets, the cartel began using micro-packages that could be smuggled through everyday items: books, electronics, even mail deliveries. The agencies responded by upgrading customs inspections, integrating AI-driven anomaly detection into sorting lines. When a package's metadata didn't match its declared contents, the system flagged it for manual inspection. The number of intercepted micro-packages grew exponentially, underscoring the efficacy of a data-driven approach to a problem that had previously relied on brute force. The broader public health response had also evolved. a statewide initiative launched by the Department of Health in partnership with faith-based groups introduced a comprehensive overdose prevention program. Syringe exchange sites, once stigmatized, became hubs for community outreach, offering counseling, health screenings, and education on safe practices. These sites were staffed by trained volunteers, many of whom were former addicts who had turned their experience into advocacy. Their presence in neighborhoods once dominated by fear offered a new narrative, one of hope, recovery, and resilience. In the weeks that followed, the narrative of the cartel shifted from one of a monolithic enemy to a series of adaptive, small-scale threats. Each time the cartels tried to regain footing, the response proved quicker, deeper, and more precise. The collaborative model, combining federal resources, community vigilance, technological innovation, and public health outreach, became a template for future operations. The legal apparatus, once slow to react, now moved in tandem with the intelligence cycle, ensuring that any financial lifeline for the cartel was severed before it could be reestablished. Yet the war was far from over. In the darkened corridors of Mexico City, a new faction had risen, leveraging cyber capabilities to disrupt supply routes and orchestrate counterfeit distribution networks. The agencies, now better equipped and more integrated, stood ready. Their next move would involve intercepting data packets, dismantling digital marketplaces, and preempting the cartel's evolution. The promise, forged in the ashes of past surges, remained clear. The United States would continue to strike faster, deeper, and harder, ensuring that the deadliest chapters of the cartel's empire would remain silent, buried beneath the hard work of communities, law enforcement, and a nation united against the scourge of synthetic opioids. The coordinated convergence of federal rigor, community vigilance, technological insight, and public health resilience forged a formidable defense that will persist in adapting to the evolving threat, ensuring that synthetic opioid warfare remains a silent struggle, not a roaring surge.